Chapter 67. There was nothing to do. With the country entering lockdown, there was a paralysis among officials charged with burying her parents. Nobody knew what was allowed or when things could happen. Isla cleaned the house. She bleached everything more than once, confident that there was now no chance the deadly virus would get her from inside the house. She contacted extended family and the few friends her parents had, methodically running through the list of names to contact, adding to them whenever one of the distant aunts or uncles she contacted gave her another name she should call. It was funny getting to know your parents after they had died by virtue of what others thought about them. Their social circle was very small. She was surprised by some of the stories that people wanted to share. She never saw this side of her folks. It was a shame. She wished that she'd taken the time to really know them. Shame on her. Their relationship might have been less parent and child and more grown-up friends if she'd known some of the stories when they were alive. As she went through the household paperwork, she found that her mum was meticulous about her accounting. There was very little that Isla needed to do with their affairs. Their intentions were clear and laid out in a will that she found in the bureau at the bottom of the narrow stairs. Despite her grief, she realised that for the first time in her life she was free. Not just free from debt, but also free from the fear of disappointing her parents. She knew her parents had always loved her, but she also knew they saw her feelings as their own. And now she owned a house, and such was the scarcity of value in anything she'd left with Jacob, she decided there was nothing worth going back for. Along with her bank bits, she'd left Hackney with her passport as historic force of habit. All the other important paperwork had always been kept here or was backed up online. She didn't need to go back. Ever. The daily tasks were a new routine. The cleaning, the paperwork, the phone calls to finalise plans for the funeral. Socially distanced forays for supplies became part of the routine, and the only hardship was not being able to see her mum and dad at peace. She wasn't even allowed the closure usually afforded someone by visiting them both in the chapel of rest. These were the rules in place to limit the spread of infection. Picking up her dad's car from the hospital was an ordeal. In his initial rush, her dad had parked it on double yellows over a week before and it was now long gone. The hospital had been kind in facilitating its return with no charges. After all, how do you find a dead person? But the process had taken several long, painful conversations with organisations that all now had much better things to be doing than sorting out the repatriation of a 2014 Honda Accord. Dad had always gone with the Japanese cars as he felt you could safely drive them until they died. Or you died, whichever came first. Their joint funeral came and went. Only 5 people were allowed to attend. There had been hundreds of deaths in every town in the land, and services were limited to 15 minutes before the puff of smoke. It was over. I'm alone. That evening, she relived the night of 2 weeks before, when things changed forever. She had not heard from Jacob, not so much as a "where the fuck are you" text. He was sulking. Like the shopping and the cleaning and the paying the bills, the finishing was down to her. She sent a text. It's over. Sell my stuff if you want. His response was demeaning and without any sign of regret or respect. Fuck you, Lisa. He didn't bother to override the autocorrection that had misspelled her name yet again. She was livid that he had taken her right to say goodbye to her folks. The blackened eyes and bust nose were nothing compared to that. She would never forgive him, but she was going to have her revenge. It came in the form of never giving the bastard another thought. She wouldn't be bitter or turn herself inside out with hatred. That wouldn't affect him, but it would be toxic for her. He'd taken enough from her already, and her ultimate revenge was being free of him for good. Mostly she was angry with herself for allowing the situation to get to where it had. She was too proud to talk to her parents and let them help her, and she was angry with herself for waiting until they were dead to find out about them. She had only ever known them in one role, as her parents. She had never once seen them as people in their own rights. She regretted not telling the truth about what happened in New York the few days which had underpinned so many of her subsequent choices. They hadn't done a bad job of bringing her up. It wasn't until New York that things started to go horribly wrong for her. Until then, she'd done well. Only after 9/11 did she dramatically fall, quickly becoming less than she was before. That was not their fault. That was not anybody's fault. She drank from the glass of wine in front of her, looking at the spotlessly clean house. Her house. The only untidiness was the stack of papers on the coffee table. On top of them was the copy of the Evening Standard from 2 weeks before, the picture of Steve once again staring up at her. She read the article by Jennifer Ruby. His picture, and his typically huge smile, filled Isla with the warmth that she had been missing. He was managing bands under his own label and, of course, was doing well. She remembered the band he was so excited to be managing when they met, the Cormacs. They weren't the success he predicted, but they played around the top 10 for a couple of years before dropping into obscurity to make way for the next big thing. She'd followed his career from a distance. It was hard to miss it. Such was his profile and list of high-profile successes. She shuffled through her iTunes and found some of his signings in her playlists. There was no mention of family in the article, but he wasn't living in London. The view was from the Solent, and the castle was a fort surrounded by water between Southsea and the Isle of Wight. The article was not a significant piece of writing, just another plug for a new band that had been booked to start a UK tour before the lockdown kicked in. The timing of the breakthrough tour couldn't have been worse, and at the bottom of the article was a footnote confirming the tour had since been cancelled. But the album was already e-released, and she instantly logged onto Spotify to listen to Maverick Road. She heard the threads of the bands alluded to in the piece, remembering the Cormacs and their Celtic rock vibe which dominated the BBC Six music playlists and the jukebox in every Irish pub she'd been to since. The music aside, she was only reading the article to find out about Steve. Were they both alone? It was such a long time since they had staggered through the dusty New York streets, irrecoverably traumatised by the events of 9/11. She was affected by proxy, but it had ruined her life. Her pain was real, and as the whole world struggled to function in its newly locked-down state, Isla felt more alone than ever. 19 years was a long time to hold on to lost love. They were the real thing in waiting, and she had known in her heart that it had not been for 9/11 they would have made it. But she lost her man before he was ever hers to lose. She switched on her dad's iPad and typed Steve Lewis music into Google. It defaulted to something else. She did not want to find out about Steve the jazz pianist or Stephen the guy from the big band of fun. She searched under management and found Southsea Records. There was a fancy address in Charlotte Street, London, but as London had been cleared of all but the most essential key workers, there was no chance he would be there. Loneliness, memories, and the subsequent glasses of wine gnawed at her. Surely it won't hurt to attempt to contact him. What's the worst that can happen? He had cast her away like used toilet roll the last time they'd met. She'd walked away from him without closure. If his life was complete without her now, he could ignore their message. What harm could it do? Looking at his bio and the contact details for the company, she took a chance on an email address that followed the likely format, steve.lewis@solentrecords.info. Hello? Are you there? It's Isla, from a long time ago. Ping me back if you can. She pressed send and waited. She'd given the power to cyberspace. Isla took another sip of wine and drifted off in her chair. It was her mum's chair, and she wondered whether her mum forgave her. She'd been very clear to her all her life that it was the man's job to chase the girl. Here she was, disappointing her again and chasing a man who made it clear that he didn't want her. Isla was restarting her life. The rules were there to be rewritten or revalidated. This was her time to take control.